Morning, Commissioners. David Baer, 921 Tuscaloosa Trail. Here's President of Seminole Seminole, as well as President of the Lake Tuscaloosa Association. I was here in July. Gave a big presentation that focused on a lot of points that I think are very salient to remember here, namely why natural lands conservation is so important. And I focused that it wasn't just my opinion or the opinion of the 50 or so people who were there, but the future land use elements incorporated it. Survey data commissioned by you guys showed it. Envision 2045 showed it. At the time, I was presenting that the natural lands, or that the referendum was the best way to do it. You guys elected not to give the citizens the option to vote on that, and all said that you want to do this. And this has the opportunity to be a great program. And I'm very excited about it, and all these citizens, you can hear, are very excited about it as well. As long as it does what it's supposed to do, incorporates the key elements of what we all had in mind with the referendum. And the referendum would have passed. We've seen it pass. Mr. Owens mentioned 8 all passed. So this is the alternative. It can be great, but there are some concerns that we have on it. And Mr. Lee touched on some of the specific ones. I want to go through some of the specific ones as well, so that you guys have some of our specific thoughts as to what those are. So I have 5 points. The first point is that this needs to, be dedicated funding. We've heard that term a lot, but it needs to be secured dedicated funding, year in and year out. So right now, there's a huge annual opt-out, which is lines 140 to 144. And I'm going to read the specific line. If expenditures are estimated to be greater than revenues for a given year, the board shall not contribute county funds for that year. Well, we've all been around government enough to know that some creative accounting can basically make this a discretionary line item year in and year out. And that's not what this is intended to be. It certainly is not what the referendum would have been. This needs to be a dedicated and reliable funding source. Maybe if there's some emergency, you guys as the elected officials can have a mechanism to deal with that, the accountable elected officials. But it can't just be some bureaucratic process that happens behind closed doors. The second line item, or second concern is, as it's written, there is a definition in here that I think opens this up well beyond what anybody intended. So there's a definition for recreation land, which is defined on lines 80 to 82. Recreation land is defined as lands that do not meet the criteria for environmentally sensitive land, but provides for outdoor space for development of recreational elements, as well as open areas that may or may not be canopied. And then that is incorporated into what can be purchased in line 158. I do not think that's what's intended by this board, and it certainly is not what's intended by any of these people or what we had in mind with the referendum. What was in mind then, and I think what's in all of your guys' mind, are some of these other definitions, such as passive recreation, natural lands, conservation. It is not what is defined here as recreation land. The third issue is, as written, this is in effect driven by Leisure Services, not by the ARC. So the Leisure Services Department effectively has a veto vote over whether you as commissioners are presented with particular parcels or not. I point you to lines 165 and 167. Line 165 says, notwithstanding any particular parcel of land which both ARC and Leisure Services may deem to meet their present criteria. So if Leisure Services does not deem it sufficient, then it doesn't come to you. And line 167 basically does the same thing. Both ARC and Leisure Services must exercise discretion in deciding not only whether the parcel qualifies, yada, yada, before it comes to you. That's particularly concerning to me with the definition of recreation land being in here. So Leisure Services has a much broader scope of what they're doing than this ordinance. And so if you allow Leisure Services to drive the boat, again, no offense to anybody, but they have a different agenda, a broader agenda than what this ordinance does. And you're opening this up for problems in the future, because future commissions won't necessarily have the clarity that you guys have as to what this was all about. So it's very important to have this all defined properly. Again, 165, 167, also lines 178 and 179 are problematic in that same way. Presently, those lines read, Leisure Services, with input from ARC, shall create a 5-year acquisition plan listing selected nominated properties. And that that is it, that's backwards. This is supposed to be not leisure services driven, but ARC driven, I believe. So it should, instead of saying leisure services with input from ARC, it should say ARC with input from leisure services. But that it's backwards there, I think is consistent with how some of this other stuff is drafted. Also consistent with that issue is the membership. I don't think should be taken directly from Parks and Preservation. It should be experts that are focused on this particular topic, not who are part of a broader panel that have other issues. Fourth issue I have here is that I think it would be valuable to incorporate within the ordinance guidelines, not punt it to be defined later. So lines 163 to 165, as well as 207, basically say that the site evaluation guidelines will be defined by staff and by ARC. You guys are the executives. You guys are supposed to be setting forth what are our goals. What is it that these properties are supposed to embody as characteristics? And then that can be implemented by staff or the ARC, but you guys have the opportunity to set it right here. And finally, in my last seconds, I say, candidly, the number is not, in our judgment, sufficient. The referendum started at 4.7. It averaged over its period of time at 7.8. The referendums around the state that all passed are at $8 million per year, collectively $250 million over a 20-year period, 140 per 20-year period. This starts at 3.5, less than 25%.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Yeah, thank you for the extra seconds.
Yeah. I actually gave you an extra 3 minutes. You didn't even know it. It flew by.
I did notice that.